Good afternoon. If we could be seated, we're running a little bit late. And as you're seated, I'm going to go ahead and save a little time and just start talking. My name's Zachary Hodges, and I'm president of Houston Community College, our West Side campuses. And I want to welcome you here today to our A-Leaf campus. And you're in the West Houston Institute, which is, thank you, Houston Community College taxpayers. This is the innovation hub of Houston Community College. And we are proud of the way we're redefining higher education, not only here, but throughout Houston Community College to create that 21st century workforce for Houston. It's my pleasure to introduce the video that I think defines the reason that we're all here today.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to set expectations. Texas is about to have a very significant disaster.
They said the storm surge could be, higher than that 4 feet maybe. And we're getting an indication of what's coming in right now, and this is just, the beginning.
I'm gonna head out to Austin. I'm not sticking around here. My first real hurricane. I'm scared.
I hope we're not overreacting, but, and I hope we are overreacting after all. Hope nothing catastrophic happens, hopefully.
What concerns me the most right now is whether or not people have heeded the warning that they have not. Their window to evacuate is rapidly coming to a close.
It's either go or die.
It's a serious storm. It's going to last 4 or 5 days, and quite frankly, this is day one. And let me tell you, it is dropping a lot of water.
We're in the eye now. It's calm and eerie. Let's look at the back wall of this hotel, and the staircase is gone. On the 3rd and 4th floor.
That swept through this area. My goodness, something just fell. The side of that home, the bricks just fell from the side of that home.
Harvey's wind speeds are now down to 75 miles per hour, but we're now entering what I call phase 2 of Harvey, potentially catastrophic flooding rains.
Feeder roads all along here flooded. You can't get out on those.
Right now where we are, the water is rising very quickly. It is not a good feeling when you are driving down the freeway and there are headlights coming at you.
We had to actually climb to the attic to the house, but I had my tools, and if it keep rising, I was gonna bust the roof open.
Floors are gone, sheetrock is gone, and cars are gone. So
you've got 2 trash bags. Yeah, this is it. Sorry, bro.
He says he's got 5, 6, 7 people. It's gonna be a little bit, but we'll come back.
We don't have anything. We lost everything in our apartment. It's just really unfortunate.
There is a reality that we have to come to grips with, and that is we are just beginning the process of responding to the storm.
The boats are nice. They're the best, right?
Yes, this is the rescue team.
This is the rescue team.
I didn't even imagine that it was going to be this catastrophic like this. This is horrible. I have my 2-year-old. He told me he was scared.
It was just a blessing to be rescued.
Please bless every one of their souls, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
It's always been the same. Texans are just a strong bunch that we'll just rebuild and put it behind them.
There's a lot of good people down here at Mint, though. I mean, I feel right at home down here. I miss my family, but I feel right at home.
You know what? This weekend, we're going to be pretty normal in Houston because that's just the way we are.
Texas pride, Texas strength.
Texas pride. You're going to see it this weekend.
Here we go. Ooh, I scared myself. First of all, just watching that makes me emotional again. It's hard to believe it's been, 9 months, give or take, and I remember some of those stories so clearly. I think I'm going to go over here to where the script is so I can figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. But good afternoon. I'm Melanie Lawson with ABC 13, and I am delighted to be here. Hard to believe, but tomorrow is the first day of hurricane season. Yeah, I know, just thinking about it makes you nervous, doesn't it? But we've already all had a tropical storm or a subtropical storm. We keep getting these new categories, and that has already hit at least parts of Florida. But we're going to be talking today about how to prepare ourselves a little bit better. So on behalf of the Houston Stronger campaign, I want to welcome all of you here, and thank you so much for joining us today. If you give yourself a round of applause, please. You are probably all aware of this, but I will certainly remind you once again, Judge Ed Emmett, Harris County Judge Ed Emmett, and Harris County Commissioners have requested a special election to be held on August 25th, so really just a few weeks away. This August 25th election will let voters decide whether or not to approve billions of dollars for flood control projects. Now, I've got some numbers I'm going to throw at you that will probably blow your mind. Hurricane Harvey, first we want to deal with actual lives because that's the most important number, cost the Houston region 83 lives and over $120 billion in economic damage, just mind-boggling. Well, Houston Stronger is a group of business organizations, nonprofits, and local experts, many of whom you saw in those pictures, who hope to avoid these sorts of losses in the future by improving flood control infrastructure all across the region. And if you'd like to learn more about the Houston Stronger campaign, all you have to do is visit houstonstronger.net. So all one word, houstonstronger.net. According to the experts with Houston Stronger, Harris County needs approximately $35 billion in flood control infrastructure to protect all of its watersheds from flooding like we saw with Hurricane Harvey. Houston Stronger is also calling for government assistance to help so many residents who flooded with relocation, with repair of their homes. And I don't know about you, but I know so many people who are still trying to get themselves back in a good position. So many people who are still working on their homes or who have never found really a permanent place to stay. In fact, it wasn't that long ago that I saw a bit of research for our area that showed that the number of homeless went way up because there were so many people who essentially were forced out of their homes and they were already living right there on the edge. And many of those people have either gone into, living in some of those tents that we see around, perhaps living with relatives or friends, but they still are not in a good place even today, almost a year later. Well, the two experts on stage with me today are working to bring these sorts of infrastructure improvements and assistance programs to our communities, and you're going to get a chance to hear from them. But before we do that, I think I'm going to introduce some of our special guests here today. You're all special. Let me say that first. Everybody here is special. But I do particularly want to mention some of our elected officials and make an apology for one elected official. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee was going to be with us today. She was unable to make it, but she did send a resolution, so I will pass that on to whoever the most appropriate person is with Houston Stronger. That is here. And I also want to recognize some of the special guests who are here today. We've got a couple of Katy City Council members. Chris Harris, where's Chris Harris with Katy City Council at large? There you go, Chris, good to see you. You sure you're old enough to be a city council member? All right, good. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. Janet Court, also with Katy City Council. She is Ward A. Hi there, Janet. You also don't look old enough, just for what that's worth. This looks like Kathy Piffner. I'm trying to read my handwriting, which is not the best, with USDA. Oh, you're here. Well, good. I will call you Kathy from here on in. Oh, okay, Kent, all right. Well, Kent, Kathy, whatever. No, I'm kidding. Wendy Duncan, who is the director at Willow Fork Drainage District. Hey there, Wendy, thank you so much for being here. This is Michael Landrum, who is a judge with the 113th Civil District. There you are, Judge, good to have you here. Thank you so much. I think this is Jan Davidson, who is director for MUD 160. There you are. What are you doing way in the back? Come on up here with us. No. Oh, you're special teams. Okay, I got you. David Molina, who is director with HC MUD 165. There you are in the back too. All right, David, thank you. Mary Snyder, who is district director with Congressman John Culberson. Is Mary? Huh? Oh, you're at the special table too. You guys are special back there, I tell you what. Heather Cook, who is the director for Representative Ted Poe. There you are in the front. And please give our best to the representative. We know he's only got a few more months, I guess. But please send him our best. David Robinson. I know where David's sitting, right here. Houston City Council at large, number 2. Again, I've mentioned the judge. Greg Travis, who it looks like Greg is with Houston District G. Where is Greg? Is he in the back? Oh, hey, there you are. Good to see you. And Stan, we all know Stan. Stan Stannard, I hope I'm saying that right, Stan. Our county clerk. So if you're wondering who that man is, he's in charge of a whole lot of stuff, but starting with our voting. So we know why you're here, Stan. Thank you so much. Mr. President, thank you for inviting us to be here today. How many of you, this is the first time you've been out to this HCC campus? Oh, the whole room. Now, there's probably a reason for that. This is brand spanking new, isn't it? All right, so there's a reason, but it is gorgeous, and we will spread the word to everybody else. Well, I do want to go ahead and get our panel started, and I'm going to need some help, I think, making sure I say this name right. Russ, is it Poppy? Is it? All right. Well, I'm in the neighborhood. Good. Come on up if you would, Russ. He has served as executive director for the Harris County Flood Control District since 2016. Once again, does not look like he's old enough to have been doing that. Russ oversees the district's mission to devise countywide flood damage reduction plans, implement those plans, and maintain its infrastructure. He earned his civil engineering degree from Texas A&M University. Any Aggies in the house? There you go. I was wondering if the whoop was going to come on out there. He spent 6 years as an engineer in the private industry before joining the Harris County Architecture and Engineering Department in September of 2005. Since then, Russ has held various leadership positions within both Harris County and Harris County Flood Control District. So we're awfully glad to have you here, Russ. Our other panelist is Marvin Odom. There is Marvin. He has served as the City of Houston's Chief Recovery Officer since Labor Day of 2017. Wow, you got there right as everything was breaking and falling down. How about that? He oversees the City of Houston's recovery efforts, which include parts of flood control policy and infrastructure planning, as well as the City of Houston's housing recovery plan. Now, Marvin retired, can you believe that? Look at this guy. Retired as president of Shell Oil Company in 2016. That retirement lasted exactly 1 year, is that right? Or a little bit less than that. He holds a degree in engineering from the University of Texas. Oh man, I gotta separate them. There you go, that's more like it, hook 'em. And an MBA from the University of Houston, and serves on a number of private and public boards. So we are bringing together Aggies and Longhorns, and we're gonna talk about some issues that are important to all of us today. Did you guys get your mics and turn them on? Good, all right. So I'm going to ask all of you all, we're going to have a little bit of a conversation up here, but I certainly hope you also have some questions. I don't think we're going to try to write them down. How about we just promise that when you stand up and ask your question, you ask 1, not 5. And we all kind of stay on point so we can remember to keep moving along, because I'm sure there are lots of questions here, especially as we begin to sort of get things together again. Gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to share the stage with you. Oh, I'm delighted. And I'm going to begin here. I've got some questions that were kind of laid out for us, but I may deviate from time to time, so bear with me. Well, Russ, I want to talk to you about the district with a lot of infrastructure. And according to this, about 1,500 channels totaling 2,500 miles in length, which is just mind-boggling, as well as more than 60 regional stormwater detention basins. And we learned a lot about detention basins, didn't we, during Harvey? And a 2.5 square mile wetlands mitigation bank. So a lot of numbers and figures there, but you get the gist. We have heard from so many communities out there who said, listen, we've got all of these things in our backyard, but we need you to dredge them, maybe de-silt them, maybe make other repairs to the district's infrastructure, and yesterday would be when we need it done. At a high level, what repairs does the flood control district have planned, and how long will those repairs take? That's really the question.
That's a big question.
Yeah.
It might take quite a bit of an answer. So I imagine if I asked everybody if they knew who FEMA was, I'd see a bunch of hands go up in the room. But how many people know what the NRCS is? Yeah, a handful. Okay.
Is that do know or don't know?
Do know.
All
okay.
right, so
All
the smart kids. Okay, gotcha.
So
gotcha.
contrary to popular belief, NRCS, which is the Natural Resources Conservation Service, is actually a subsidiary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. That is the federal agency that has taken the primary lead in helping us make repairs to our infrastructure. So even though we're in a highly urbanized environment, we're dealing with a program that's set up to be a rural type of a repair system. But I don't get to make the rules, I just have to follow them. So we're working with NRCS to make the majority of our repairs. FEMA's also in the mix, but here's the nuance. NRCS has to say no before FEMA will take over and start making the repairs. So we have to work these things in sequence. Now, the good news is both those agencies have come to our area. They've seen the devastation. We've had boots on the ground, not only with their staff, but with ours as well. And we've cataloged a wide range of different repairs that have to get done. Everything from debris removal, which, by the way, we have already removed north of $4 million worth of debris from our channels. Wow. Some of the channels are requiring a second pass, and we're starting some of those this week. And I'll be honest, to deviate a little bit, the ones that are hardest to get to are the natural ones. So like we got some work left to do on Cypress where we don't have a lot of access. So the way we remove the debris is from within the channel, which is slow and sometimes depends upon some rain to elevate the bayou level so we can get our equipment in and out. So debris removal is ongoing, but also the repairs. And so in sum, we're thinking total reinvestment, hard and soft costs, somewhere north of $150 million to make the repairs to the channels that you had just identified. The good news is we're starting to see some of that federal money start flowing in. We expect to start executing contracts next month with NRCS to start making some of these repairs, but $150+ million is a big number, and it's going to take us a while to do that. So as we start rolling out these projects, we're thinking it's going to take us around 2 years or so to make all those repairs.
Now, the only problem there is time is always of the essence, and we're thinking it's been 9 months. People could say, hey, listen, it's this creek in my backyard or this bayou down the way. What takes so long to get this done?
Well, it's part of the federal process, and first going through NRCS and then FEMA. But all that aside, we know that some of these repairs are highly needed. They were emergency repairs, and so we've already spent $14 million of our local money without any type of reimbursement so far to make these necessary repairs in the most critical areas. Where, for example, working with the city, for example, where force mains got compromised because we had a channel failure, we had to spend that money up front to make those repairs. So part of this is that's a huge dollar amount. We don't have the resources locally to fund that ourselves. So we are absolutely reliant on some of these federal funds to start flowing before we can really start making these repairs in earnest.
I've got to ask you about reservoirs because I think a lot of us learn pretty quickly about reservoirs we didn't even realize were there. And in many cases, it had a great deal to do with the flooding after the fact because those waters had to be released. Are there a lot of others out there we don't know about? Are there any plans to perhaps change how things are done so that people, for instance, are not allowed to build right there where there might be a reservoir?
Sure. So as part of our recovery plan, we know that there's two primary methods that you can address a flooding issue. You can either increase our channels' carrying capacity to move the water out of the area quickly, or you create another stormwater detention basin, which basically acts as a hole in the ground. And we design ours to work by gravity without pumps or without gates that you have to operate. So 100% driven by Mother Nature. And those really function to serve as storage areas for excess stormwater so that that water gets pulled off our channels, puts in that parking lot, so to speak, until the channels recede, and then that water can be slowly metered back out into the channel as the channel levels come down. That's our approach for stormwater detention, and that's going to continue to be our approach because we know that once you start complicating these things with things that have to be operated by man, well, you introduce potential failures. And so that's why we try to design all of our features, our stormwater basins, to operate 100% by gravity without the need for one of our staff to go there and intervene.
All right. Marvin, I haven't forgotten about you. Now, you are there. Good. Now, we've heard that there is a lot of cooperation between the city and the county right now, working together to get people back in their homes, to get their homes repaired, and in many cases, when they can no longer go back home, perhaps to get on other programs. So we'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about some of those programs and really how people can find help. Where do they need to go if, for instance, they're still in a bad position so many months later?
Okay, it's so another broad topic, but when it comes to cooperation, I think the first thing to understand is the city and the county are working together on all sorts of different levels, from small things to very big things. Probably important to start with the big ones, huh?
Yeah.
So as you think about the fact that HUD has now appropriated money and the Congress has appropriated money to come to Texas primarily for housing. So those are the CDBG funds directed towards housing, $5 billion to the state. I will tell you that we were headed to a position where all of that money would have been completely administered, decisions would have been made, both in terms of who was helped and which apartments got built and so forth, via Austin. And I think both the city and the county felt pretty strongly that that's not the right way to administer that type of program. So we worked together, spent time in Austin, spent a lot of time in DC. And now what we have is a program with those CDBG funds where about $2.5 billion total will come to the Houston, Harris County area with local control to decide on where that money gets spent. And I use that as a starting point because it really took both voices, city and county, and a very strong rationale to get that sort of change made. So we're working together in those ways. There are many other examples which, if helpful, we can go into. But I think you also asked the question of where people can go for help. And I also, I think, want to address the question that you asked earlier about why does it take so long? And I think we have to recognize that the piece Russ mentioned, the big money, the federal funding that comes in, I think most people in this room probably know it, but the first of that big money will really start to arrive, hopefully by August, maybe as late as September. That would be the housing money we were just talking about. The mitigation money for infrastructure and so forth has been appropriated, but it hasn't been put on the register yet. It's not available to the state yet, and certainly not available to the more local communities. Ideally, that money would be here sometime in the fall as well. I mean, estimates vary as to when that will happen. But I use those two examples just to say the pace of federal funding is driving a lot of these factors. Separate discussion we ought to have one day is how do we redesign the system from top to bottom to cut that time in half or more, which I don't think would be particularly difficult, but separate discussion. When people are though looking for help, well, maybe it's also helpful to recognize that it doesn't mean no help has come to the area. So if you add up the FEMA individual assistance money that's come to this area, the numbers I have in my head are Houston numbers. Each of these would be bigger if you included the entire county. The insurance payments through the National Insurance Program, and the money that's gone in terms of small business loans, we're talking about $4 billion that's come to Houston itself. Again, multiply that for the county. But there's so much need out there that anywhere you look, you can find unmet needs that are addressed. So we're planning for those. Maybe we'll go into the housing program in more detail here in a little bit. But
And if you don't mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about housing because I know there are so many people out there, and you may have a much better idea of the numbers within the city of Houston, for instance, of people who still are not situated, who are not, if not made whole, at least made nearly whole by now. Any idea how many families or individuals we're looking at?
I think it's a really hard number to count because you don't know how many people are staying with relatives and other, sort of not particularly sustainable, but, decent temporary conditions. I will give you a number, though, that I think will astound you and is different than the number a lot of people quote. So we've done a lot of work in the city of Houston to understand how many dwellings were damaged, both single-family homes and multifamily apartments, basically. We did that by gathering all the data that's out there from FEMA, from places that we geotagged where we picked up debris in front of that home. If you have a block and you picked up debris in front of 5 houses and there's 5 more, pretty much know the other 5 flooded as well. So we counted those. our number comes up to around 350,000 housing units,
That's incredible.
single or multifamily, in the city of Houston that had significant damage.
And that does not include the county numbers as well. This
Does
is just
not.
strictly within the city boundaries. Any idea what?
So in an unincorporated Harris County, the numbers weren't quite as severe. They were around 31,000 structures. I mean, still an appreciable amount, and it's mind-boggling, but it puts it in context with the rainfall that we got from Hurricane Harvey.
Boy, but we're talking close to 400,000 combined, and
Big
that's
number.
just what we, yeah, exactly. Well, both of you have referred to the time you spent in Washington, D.C. We know you've probably logged a whole bunch of miles going back and forth, working with the Houston congressional delegation, working with federal agencies on getting that federal funding. And we know that you've had some success, Congress allocating over $141 billion, as you indicated, to 2017 major disaster declaration areas. But the question becomes, how hard will it be for our area to get some of those funds, and what can we do to make sure that Texas and our area, specifically Southeast Texas, because we were hit so hard, gets its fair share of that?
So from our perspective, we were watching with greatest interest the Bipartisan Budget Act that got of 2018 that got passed in February of this year. That was the budget funding bill that was $89 billion and change that was passed. And that was really the lion's share of the public money that was been made available to entities like Harris County, City of Houston, to start making infrastructure, long-term resiliency type repairs. And so we're looking at that bill that's got $28 billion in there for HUD, I think $23 billion for FEMA. There was around $17 billion for the Corps of Engineers, and there were some others. NRCS got funded so we can make our repairs. But,
okay, now I'm not good at math, so tally that up for me.
So the bill in sum total was $89 billion.
Okay.
$89 billion.
Okay,
So, but
89.
those were the 3 or 4 pieces that we were paying most particular attention to because, from our perspective, those have the biggest impact upon how much local money we can leverage with federal dollars to make that many more improvements. But here's the thing, though: there's no more such thing as earmarks. So there's no congressionally directed funding. So they made that money available to the states that were impacted by HIM, which was Harvey, Irma, Maria, and then the wildfires in California and Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands. And so it's sort of as one of the congressmen put it, it's a pie eating contest. And so it's really who can set themselves up the quickest to start bringing in those federal dollars on projects that meet the federal criteria. Everything from benefit to cost ratio, income requirements, and there's a whole slew of them, as you might imagine, for federal funds.
All right, so that's $89 billion. Is that for everybody, for all of the areas that were hit by disaster versus $141 billion?
That's right. So that's available by multiple states plus Puerto Rico plus the U.S. Virgin Islands. And so that's not all coming to Texas.
Okay. Well, given that, how much is that the $4 billion you all were talking about that has already made its way here?
So of the big numbers that Russ was talking about, the only one where we know exactly how much is coming to Texas is in the housing dollars from the HUD allocation directed towards housing, $5 billion to the state of Texas, and about half of that to the Houston-Harris County area.
So we're really just talking about $2.5 billion that's made its way here
Well,
so far.
and it hasn't actually arrived yet, but that's what's been allocated to us.
Okay.
That's what we're hoping will arrive in the August-September timeframe.
And that'll probably come in tranches. I think, as I understand it, the first tranche is going to be around $1 billion or so, and then the other $1 billion plus will come sometime next year.
All right, now.
So we're still waiting on a definition for the rest of the CDBG dollars are for mitigation, infrastructure, that type of thing. We're still waiting on seeing that allocation. I think by the stipulations that were provided, we can pretty well guess it's about $4 to $5 billion for Texas as well. Much harder then to translate that to what the local allotment would be. So that all is still work to come. I think the one point I'd want to make, though, on the question of that whole process is, a pat on the back to our congressional delegation for working very hard on behalf of people here. But this is a process where you can't afford to get tired at all. So we're still in the early stages of this. So it's the allocation piece we were talking about and how much will actually come to this area. And then we shouldn't forget, and Russ mentioned it, the Army Corps with the $17 billion allocation, how much of that will make its way to projects in this area. That's an important one to keep an eye on. And we shouldn't forget the whole idea of a fourth appropriation. Some people would tell you the earliest that could happen, if it happens at all, would be in the fall or later. But we should always push but at least keeping that on the table as a possibility as the unmet need is better understood over time.
I will say the governor has made an announcement, I think earlier this year, $500 million was the first award through FEMA Hazard Mitigation Grant Program funding. And the district to date has already submitted around $250 million worth of applications against that $500 million that's right now at the state. They've made a preliminary award for us to start doing some critical buyouts, and that will hopefully be on the first Commissioner's Court in June 12th for award, which will help us start acquiring around 170 structures that were deemed substantially damaged as a result of Harvey. So we're starting to see some of that money to come in, and it's at the state level right now, at least for the HMGP grant funding for that allocation. And like I said, we've already asked for about half of it in the applications we've submitted so far.
All right, I don't know about you all, but the numbers are dizzying here. And as I said, I didn't know there was going to be math with all of this.
I think to be fair, there's one other category we ought to mention. When Russ highlighted the category, which is the money that we can get for public assistance through FEMA, which they've been funded, and now it's really in our court to identify what work needs to be done, agree that with FEMA, and then the funds can flow as soon as that agreement's in place. So again, speaking for the city of Houston, we think there's about $2.5 billion of damage to city infrastructure. All those damage assessments are now finished, and the negotiation is now taking place on each of those projects with FEMA to identify or agree on the amount of damage, and very importantly, to agree on the mitigation dollars that could be applied to taking whatever asset was damaged, be it a municipal courts or whatever, and putting it in a position where if we had the same event happen again, it wouldn't be damaged the next time.
All right. Well, I tell you, as I listen to you all talk about this, a couple of questions come to mind, not the least of which is, what takes so dang long? You know, as I think about all of these families out there who are still trying to make do, they've gone through all of the machinations with FEMA and local agencies, but we're moving into another hurricane season, and it's hard to imagine that we're still looking at, you know, sort of pushing it through slowly but surely to get that money here.
Well, from our perspective, I guess the good news is all the stuff that we're talking about right now is in addition to our day-to-day work. You know, we still get $120 million a year in money to do both maintenance and operation of our infrastructure, as well as money to do new construction. And that new construction is still ongoing. It may not be as obvious with everything else going on right now, but to date, we've already been averaging around $10 million a month in our capital program. And that's not doing too bad considering all we get is $60 million a year. So we're going to outpace, you know, what we get this year from capital funding, but that's because some of these federal dollars are starting to flow in, and we're taking advantage of grants that were awarded from federal funds in previous years. And so our normal operations are continuing to move on, and that's the underlying current that is moving with consistency as we're starting to talk about these other opportunities.
All right, but you get to answer the dang long question.
Yeah, so I have a personal opinion on this, which I think is accurate, and that is, so the disaster recovery system itself is several decades old now. And over time, you know what happens, that something gets abused or doesn't go right, a new layer of check and balance and so forth gets layered on. You do that for several decades, and you end up with a system that works, but it takes an incredibly long period of time. That's why I say now is the opportunity, or certainly after 2017, with all the disasters we had, to redesign that federal system top to bottom, all the way to the locality level. And you heard my estimate. You could at least cut the time in half and maybe do better than that.
Yeah, and for so many families out there who are trying to deal with this on an individual basis, you know, we've heard all the nightmarish stories about FEMA and about other agencies having to deal with it. Do you see that becoming easier? Because obviously you all are concerned about the infrastructure and how we can avoid another 500-year flood or whatever we're up to now every other year. But do you see making it easier as well for individuals and for families and neighborhoods?
Well, you know, I think so that process would help. Let's just say if it takes a year, maybe you could make it 6 months. Let's use that as a benchmark. 6 months is still too long for an individual who's experiencing that kind of trauma. And that's one of the things that, you know, I've had to reset my personal expectations several times since I've stepped into this space, because it's hard to reconcile that timing, but it's also a difficult one to fix. I think it's, though, in that space that we need to really recognize the strength of the philanthropic and the nonprofit community that we have here in the Houston-Harris County area that does step into that space and helps to a degree that is just absolutely astounding.
Yeah, and I think the whole country got a chance to see how we take care of ourselves here in Texas. But I guess the frustration is we all pay taxes. We're all told that this is going to happen, and it's going to happen quickly. The president was here right after the storm. He's here again today, just as coincidence would have it. And he guaranteed at that point, he promised that the money would be flowing quickly and we would be taken care of. So the frustration becomes, once again, why? Why does it take so long?
And again, I think there's at least a movement in the right direction, because if you go back and look at happened after Tropical Storm Allison in 2001, we didn't see anywhere near the amount of federal opportunities back then as we are as a result of Harvey. And I think that's just an evolution, I think, to the desire to better respond to these. And so I think we're headed in the right direction, especially with respect to the amount of federal funds that are starting to become available. And I think it's easier to gripe now. It's like, well, I wish it was coming a lot sooner. But at least we're heading in the right direction. The dollar amounts we're seeing, at least from our perspective, are increasing. And I think the next challenge is going to be, okay, well, how do you make that happen more quickly? There was an article in one of the local newspapers, I guess about a month ago, talking about buyouts. Here we are, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, for 9 months now. It's hard to believe, almost 9 months since Hurricane Harvey. And people obviously flooded very badly, and some of them were on the repeat flood, highly eligible for a buyout. We were desirous to buy them out. And here we're now just barely getting the money 9 months later, and out of that initial grant that we got awarded, already 40 of the homes have said thanks but no thanks, because they've moved on to another opportunity. And those are missed opportunities for us as well, and that's a little disappointing. So I agree. I think there needs to be a desire to try to do better the next time this happens.
Now, are you seeing some real progress, though, when it comes to, and you mentioned the number of disasters we've had. We've now started naming them all, whether it's the Memorial Day, the tax day, the this, the that, 100-year floodplain, no, make that 500-year, that sort of thing. Do you see some progress in terms of, for instance, dredging out, I think Sims Bayou was one of the worst, wasn't it, a few years ago? Sims Bayou is a perfect example. This time around, it apparently did not flood as much as it had in the past. Do you count those as small victories?
I count that as a big victory. I mean, Sims Bayou was a federal project that we conducted in partnership with the Corps of Engineers. It took about 20 years to complete, $400 million investment. But at the end of all that, it was completed in 2015. And since then, including Harvey, we've seen very little, if any, bayou flooding along the main stem of Sims Bayou since it was completed. So we know that these projects work. We know that they have merit. But these are big dollar amounts, and it takes some time to make all these happen, because it's not like we can just put excavators out there tomorrow, because in many of our channels, we don't have all the right-of-way that it would take, for instance, to widen them to the width and the depth that they need to handle an event like a 100-year storm, much less a storm like Harvey.
And the last thing we want to do is take 20 years per waterway or per project. Well, let's talk a little bit about money, because I mentioned earlier that Harris County is holding a special bond election on August 25th. Judge Emmett, who I believe we'll hear from in a little bit, hey there, Judge, good to see you, has mentioned that the amount of the bond is likely to be about $2.5 billion. Is that right, Judge? $2.5 billion, okay. So, Russ, what would you do with those funds if it is improved by voters? And what happens if you don't get the money? And once again, do we just wait on the feds?
Right, if it's one thing that's rung clear from Harvey as well as some of the other recent floods, is our residents are demanding more projects to be done more quickly. And I think the bond that we're looking at will certainly offer an avenue for that to happen. The amount of money that we're talking about, around $2.5 billion, there's some estimates in there about how much of that would be used as a local match to, say, basically take one of our dollars and turn them into three with the help of the federal government. The remaining $1.5 billion would be on local projects that we know we need to complete, even though they may not be eligible for a federal partnership for whatever reason. So we're looking at this $2.5 billion as an opportunity to make as much as $4.5 to $5 billion in sum total for improvements to our overall infrastructure. If we could make that happen, that would be about a 6-fold increase in the amount of production that would be made available to the flood control district compared to the $60 million we get annually right now. So, I mean, obviously you can do a lot of good with that, and that's the opportunity I think that we're looking at right now with this bond election.
All right, then I want to ask you then, Marvin, because there are so many areas where you overlap, the city and the county, but what would this mean for the city of Houston?
I think well, it's tremendous. I mean, I'm all thumbs up on what the county is pointing towards here. There is, of course, quite a few of those projects that would happen in the city of Houston or impact the city of Houston. So as supportive as we can possibly be in every respect. I expect there'll be a lot of debates over exactly which project or how this and that and so forth, but again, all positive. I think the one thing that I would add to the discussion that I think is a view that's shared by Russ and his group, and that is the list of projects is important, but prioritizing the projects so that we know exactly what happens when as the money arrives is equally important, because it's not only that particular project, it's all the linkages between that all the way down to ditch and drainage decisions in a particular neighborhood that tie into that bigger project that are important. So we need to know the order and the estimated time frame so that we can all work together on the whole system.
And I presume between the two of you, or between your various agencies, you'll be spending a lot of time kind of huddling and figuring out what your priorities will be.
Well, not only between the agencies, but at the press conference yesterday, the judge announced that we're going to be holding one meeting in all of our watersheds to start gaining public input and comments on these proposed list of projects as well. Basically help us fill the data gaps. We feel it's a fairly comprehensive and diverse list of projects, but again, we do our projects with the appropriate regard for community and natural values, and so it's important to us to get the input from the residents who live, work, and play in these watersheds, because our computer models say, yeah, you've got a problem here, but even models need to be calibrated and sort of gut checked, if you will. And what better way to do that than to talk with the people there who can tell you and validate not only where it floods, but more importantly, why do they think it floods? So that helps us really fine tune and better refine our project approach.
And I can tell you, as somebody who covers all of these areas, it seems to shift. Right about the time that, it's like a whack-a-mole. If you think you've got one area controlled, and then you look up, and is that pretty accurate, would you say?
Well, and that's right, because you can't look at just Harvey alone, because there were areas that didn't flood in Harvey that flooded in tax day of 2016.
Right. Well, we've got just a couple of minutes, so I thought maybe there might be some questions from many of you who know way more than I do, and perhaps you have some questions. Yes, ma'am.
So the good news is
Excellent question, yeah.
Absolutely a very good question, and absolutely yes. And so the majority of the buyouts that we do are with FEMA, but even if we do those with HUD, it is in the deed restriction that is given to us as the new property owner that it cannot be redeveloped for private purposes. The only thing we can do is turn that into a natural floodplain area. We could turn it into a stormwater detention basin. You could put a low-impact park on there. I don't do parks, but others do, and they could come in and approach us to do that, add that amenity, but no, it cannot redevelop.
This is an important other point of coordination between the city and the county. So because a buyout program requires a system and expertise and so forth, there's no reason for Houston to duplicate all those activities. And so as we get funds for buyout, we actually work with Harris County to execute that program. We identify the properties, but it gets executed through one system.
And do you have a lot of people who want to be bought out, or do you find that people, for instance, I always look at folks who live along the river, and it may flood every other year, but for whatever reasons they want to stay there. Do you have a lot of people who say,
Sure.
yeah, I'd like to get out from under?
So since Hurricane Harvey hit, we've had just under 4,000 residents contact our office saying that they'd like to be considered for a voluntary buyout.
Okay.
And that's across the entire county. Some of these people flooded for the first time and never want to flood again, but unfortunately some of these people have flooded 5 and 6 times and might be a little bit higher on the priority list.
Yeah, I'm surprised the numbers aren't even larger. Anybody else? I'm looking over on this side of the room. Any other questions out there? Yes, sir. Oh, it's Kathy. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. All right, and that's primarily rural areas, so people should really listen to that. Yes, sir. Uh-huh. And he's asking specifically about Addicks Barker Dam.
Right. So that is a U.S. Army Corps of Engineer facility, and that is their project. And yes, the work is still progressing. And I believe the last time I got an update from them, they're still looking at a 2019 to maybe early 2020 completion date to replace the current outlet structures with brand new outlet structures. That's that project's focus.
All right. Yes, sir. I saw some hands over here. Yes, sir. Great question. How much is preventable?
Well, I think from an engineer's perspective, I mean, you can prevent a lot of flooding, but who's going to write that blank check? So I think yes, we can design what it takes, but again, we don't do our projects in a vacuum because the amount of land that it takes, right of way, stormwater detention basins, that takes a lot of out of a community that was once homes or businesses, and now we have to use that land potentially to build these projects. And so, yes, we can design it, but the important piece is getting the community input to make sure that okay, we can do this much of improvement, but here's the consequences in the form of needed rights of way or impacts to the community. And that's a conversation that has to happen to make sure that we're doing these projects that work with the again the appropriate regard for community and natural values.
And
I
Marvin?
wonder if I could just add a couple things to that. I mean, the main thing that I've learned and I keep in mind now is how long it actually takes. So, I think when Judge Emmett was talking the other day, talked about a 15-year program. So you have to think about it in terms of 1 to 2 decades for this coming into place. I think the brief answer to your question is a lot of this can be fixed and mitigated over time, but it takes a long time, and there'll still be a lot of risk and the in-between factors. Just two other points I'd raise. One is that we have an issue that I think we're all going to see and we're all going to take part in as we go forward, which is how do we equitably apply these projects across the geography we're talking about so that everyone benefits from these, and that's part of that decision element, I think, when it comes to prioritizing which projects happen when. And the other is, since we will be spending, we as the bigger we, as we will be spending so much money over this 1 to 2 decades period of time, is to always keep in mind as we spend it, how can we, and are there options there along with that spending to improve quality of life, to improve the amount of green space, to use natural systems? There's a lot of overlays of decisions that I think come along with this just a very straightforward flood mitigation discussion.
Yeah,
I saw a hand over here. Yeah, I was going to take one last question. So you're waving in the back. This is why you need to be sitting up front. Just kidding. But no, there's a young lady right there. You're looking around, but didn't you have your hand up? Yeah. Ooh, there's throwing a hand grenade in there. Yeah.
Well, and as you look at the Addicks, Barker, Buffalo watersheds, that's primarily outside county boundaries, deals with Waller County and Fort Bend County. Both those counties have adopted stormwater detention mitigation programs as they develop. So they've got their own programs that they implement. We recently applied for a grant through FEMA to partner with Montgomery County to our north that primarily drains all the way through ultimately Lake Houston to do a study to evaluate, okay, are there enough things being done with respect to regulation to make sure that those impacts are being mitigated before that floodwater starts headed down our way? Because people don't realize the watershed of San Jacinto River is huge. It drains all the way to the southeast side of the city of Huntsville.
Wow.
I mean, it's a very large area, and so there's multiple counties, not just Montgomery County that comes into play. Many of these are rural, sleepy little counties today, but we know that they're ripe for development because they're extending 249 up towards College Station. And so we know that timing is of the essence to make sure that as these communities start developing, that they do the right thing. And so we recognize that. I've openly mentioned that in hearings that I've testified at the the state capitol. And so it's certainly on the radar screen. We're coordinating with not only our state delegation, but also with the Texas Water Development Board, as this is a very important issue because you're exactly right. This water all ultimately flows through Harris County. We make sure that they're doing the right thing.
I want to take our young man back in the very back. You get the last question, sir. Either one of you want to tackle that?
Sure. It sounds like maybe one of our facilities don't know the exact situation there, but the good news there is that we have the ability to cooperate and coordinate with other entities, governmental entities. So if it's a municipal utility district, we're doing some of those things right now where maybe it's a little bit further down on our priority list, but the MUD wants to elevate it. And if they can bring something to the table, such as additional funding, well, then we can work together collaboratively to elevate those. And so there are certainly opportunities for us to do that. I did want to make one comment, though, about the length of projects and how much time it might take to implement this infrastructure we keep talking about. I would be remiss if I didn't take this as an opportunity to remind everybody, you absolutely need to have flood insurance, even if you live outside the marked floodplain, because many of our areas that flood aren't always mapped by a floodplain. So please take this as my shameless plug for please get flood insurance if you don't already have it.
I just assume the whole state of Texas is a floodplain
You'd be
these days. Yes, sir.
Well, there's something I wanted to add to the next to last question that came up. And so I want to describe this. It's going to sound pretty aspirational, but I think it's really important. And, the judge and the mayor have talked, and I think both are willing to sponsor an activity that would be relatively short-term in terms of time frame. And it wouldn't slow anything down that's happening now. So we want to keep, 110% momentum on everything. But it would be geared towards developing a regional flood mitigation blueprint, if you will, that would account for all the money flowing into Harris County. I mean, not all the money, all the basically watersheds that impact Harris County, and then would basically start to answer those questions about which projects, when, where the priority sits. It could address things like what is a long-term funding strategy. And I think the vision here would be once that blueprint is in place and there's the building blocks of a funding strategy over time, which won't all be answered up front, then that becomes a very durable piece that with some transparency, the wider population understands it. It's durable and sustains multiple administrations. It doesn't all get redone at the next time new people come in and that type of thing. And very importantly, and there's been zero discussion about this so far, I think, but it would include the concept of surge protection. Because while we're talking about Harvey and the kind of flooding that we've had after Harvey, a much, an equally, actually, I think a much more devastating event would be a hurricane coming up Galveston Bay into the ship channel. And we need to be thinking about that concurrent with everything else.
Yeah, you almost don't want to conjure it up. I want the two of you to just take a final 10 seconds here. Obviously, Harvey was a devastating event for all of us. Even if you weren't directly affected, you certainly knew a lot of people who were. And it has given our city, certainly nationally and internationally, the reputation of just being, underwater all of the time. I've got friends who say, "Oh, you're from Houston. Gosh, that must be terrible there all of the time." Do you see any good coming out of these recovery efforts? It's certainly you all working together. And what do you see as the long-range plan? And I said 10 seconds, so maybe 15.
I'll give you one quick one.
Okay.
So the last couple of years that you've described, I think what it's done for this region in terms of political will and the will of the population to address some of these big issues, which we've been somewhat aware of for a while, is a dramatic change, and we need to grab that.
And I'd like to echo that because I think quick summary, Harvey impacted all of our watersheds, our whole region, and that's different than the floods we've had 2016, 2015, and before that. So I think it's really galvanized the conversation about we need to take a meaningful approach to how we address future flooding.
And so we're not hearing constantly, "Oh, you all have no zoning, so what the heck? You brought this on yourself." I know it. Does everybody here? Are you nodding because you've heard these conversations with your friends? Well, I want to thank the two of you so much for taking a few minutes to talk to us and for your hard work. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to move the program along, but I certainly appreciate you guys so much, and we will be hearing, I hope, a lot more about this before the bond election comes up. We've already talked about some of the elected officials here, but I want to recognize one of the heroes from Hurricane Harvey, and that's Constable Phil Sandlin. Now, the constable grew up near Pasadena, graduating from Dobie High School in 1987. He attended San Jacinto College, majoring in criminal justice. And in 1990, he began working for the Harris County Sheriff's Office office, leaving the office in 1992 and accepting a job with the Harris County Precinct 8 Constable's Office as a patrol deputy, rising up through the ranks to become Chief Deputy of Precinct 8 in 2005. That is a fast move. And in June of 2011, he was appointed constable by Commissioner's Court before winning in the 2012 election to keep that position. So if the constable will come on up, and his deputies, they helped rescue many, many families during Hurricane Harvey. You were one of those. Good to have you here, by the way, Constable, and we know you worked hard. You want to take my mic? Okay.
Thank y'all for having me out to speak today. Basically, my precinct is the southernmost precinct, and it borders Galveston County. So I've got 11 municipalities, with the city of Houston being the largest, Pasadena being the second largest in my precinct. But I want to kind of give you, from a law enforcement prospect on our response to Hurricane Harvey along with other agencies. And I'll say this, if Hurricane Harvey taught us anything, it is that Mother Nature is very unpredictable. With Precinct 8 being the southernmost part of Harris County, the arrival of a hurricane typically means we will experience widespread effects due to hurricane force winds as storms pass through the region. Harvey was different. With Harvey, the biggest threat came in the form of rising water in my area. Thankfully, storms of years past have helped our agency prepare for what turned out to be an historical, catastrophic water event. As with any major storm, we activate our emergency response procedures ahead of Harvey's landfall. Among other things, has activations such as the means of preparing our equipment, which is a major undertaking. Placing our OEM personnel in place at Houston Transtar. I can't say enough about Houston Transtar and what they did during our storm. We had a deputy down there from the time that we knew that it was going to make landfall. We were working together with our agencies around us. You would not believe the information that funneled through Houston Transtar and back out to our agency, southernmost of Harris County. We put our personnel on 12-hour rotating schedules, assessing the areas as conditions worsen. In the past, as such activations would mean also setting up specific locations in the precinct to house our staff for the duration of the event. I have learned from past experiences, especially since I border the Ship Channel and Clear Lake, that you never know which area is going to take on water first. So what I always do is I try to spread out my personnel all over the precinct. And that means sheltering them in schools, churches. We have 2 stations. We try to keep them in that area. Why do we do that? Because I don't want all of my cars to get flooded in one area. The cars that we don't use, I put them in parking garages to keep them safe. Judge, I'm sure you'll be very happy that I do that, because the county sure doesn't like to buy patrol cars after floods. So a lot of our resources were used. The waterways, we had so much water that a lot of our areas were cut off due to the water. By spreading them out, groups of deputies were able to respond to pockets of the precincts that were needed. I want to tell you a little bit, I'm kind of a hands-on guy since I worked the streets for so long. So I spent most of my time during Harvey in our dispatch center or on the high water truck. And I want to talk a little bit about what we saw in dispatch, what we saw out in the high water truck. In dispatch, I was sitting in there listening. The 911 system in the city of Houston was so backed up that I will tell you a lot of the constable agencies were receiving a lot of the overflow for not only police services, but especially for medical, okay? They were calling saying, I've been on the phone, I'm trying to get a hold of, I need an ambulance. So what we would do is load up in these high water vehicles, and we would go to their house. I've got a huge 1.5 deuce that will take on pretty much any amount of water we want to go through. And we would respond to people's houses that were in medical need, okay? And we would access them. I was on the truck for 2 days straight. Got to sleep a little bit, but I will tell you that we responded to one house down in Clear Lake. They continued to call dispatch, and they said, we have a man on hospice. We have a lady that's bedridden. She's been bedridden for 8 years. And when the floods came in, all of their oxygen machines were on the ground. They were plugged in, and we have no oxygen except for 2 oxygen bottles. We continued to take them oxygen during that time. We would go to the fire station. We'd ask them, can we get an oxygen bottle? We would take it to their residence. At that point, we would talk to the fire department, say, any chance that we can take you with us in our high water truck, which we did. Several times we took EMS over to that residence. They would access them, and they would say, okay, we've got enough oxygen. They should be good. At the end of that event, once we could get ambulances in, they ended up transporting both of them to the hospital. But it's that type of collaboration between HFD, our precinct, City of Houston, Sheriff's Department, that worked so well during this event. While we routinely assist other agencies, Harvey brought a whole new meaning as far as working together. We work together with our law enforcement partners out in the precinct. The second event I want to talk about was over in Precinct 2, which is right there off the Gulf Freeway, off of Scarsdale. They called us and said, hey, is your high water truck being used at this time? And we said, not at this time. We don't have any calls holding. We need you to go to Scarsdale and 45. We've got people arriving from boats. They're on their roofs of their houses, and we're dropping them off at the Gulf Freeway, but they have no way to be transported to shelters. So we took our high water truck over to that area, and I have never seen a sea of boats like I saw coming out of those subdivisions. I mean, every boat was loaded. We were loading people up, as many as we could get in that truck. We were taking them to Adobe High School, and then we were taking them to a church in Pasadena. And we did that all the way till darkness, until the boats were pulled out, and then the next morning we resumed doing the same thing. So as with any disaster like this, the lessons learned from Harvey have helped us to prepare for the future. I was proud to play a part in this response and very proud of our deputies and all of law enforcement in general. I pray that we will never witness such a devastation again, but I know that through the efforts currently underway, what we're talking about today, that hopefully we will be prepared for the next one. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Constable. We appreciate it, and we know the hard work you guys did during that period of time. John Moody, you want to come on up? While I'm bringing him up, I do want to recognize a couple of other elected officials who have arrived. Houston City Council member Amanda Arnold, sorry, that goes way back. Amanda Edwards. How many of you are Houstonians and can remember Amanda Arnold over Channel 11 1,000 years ago? Sorry about that, council member. I appreciate it, although she was lovely. You'd be happy. And Dana Harrington with Representative, I believe this is Jim Murphy's office. Is Dana here? Oh, all right. Good to see you. Thank you very much. Mr. Moody, I'm going to hand this to you because I'm not sure if that one's working, so.
Oh, all right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I want to be very brief. Judge Emmett has somewhere he needs to get to, and I promised him I'm not going to be the guy standing between him and being on time. I do want to, before I introduce Judge Emmett, which I'm going to be pretty brief because you know him, I want to thank all the folks that have been involved in Houston Stronger, and I don't want to get into names because people tell me that's always a mistake to thank individuals, but there are a bunch of you know who you are, and this has been a good, great effort. And I think we've got, unfortunately, the work now begins, which is get this behind this bond issue and make sure that we get this approved in August. I don't want to steal any of the judge's thunder, but that's mission number one right now. We got to stay focused on it. A couple other things I wanted to say, watching our two panelists, I think you probably picked up on it. One of the great pleasures I've had the last 9 months working on this project is getting to know Marvin and Russ. And I got to tell you, we are very blessed as a community to have two really smart guys focused on this issue. And I take a lot of comfort that we got the A-team out there, and we need to get the money now and let the A-team go to work and start fixing problems. The couple of people I did want to acknowledge that have really been behind this program from the beginning, and this violates my earlier covenant not to talk about individuals, but I don't know if Joe B. is here, Joe B. Allen, but Joe B. called me about 2 days after the storm had gone through and said, I want to come out of retirement, I want to go to work on this. Can I work with you at West Houston? And I said, Joe B., of course. You don't even need to ask. Do you want a title? He said, no, I don't want a title. So he's been involved, and I think all of us that have been around Joe B. have watched him, and he's put heart and soul into this in terms of developing options, developing strategies that we've put forth, some of which maybe ultimately be incorporated in some of the work as we go forward. And the other one is Augie Campbell. Augie, you've really been the quarterback of this effort and have done a great job, so thank you. So that turns me to Judge Emmett. One of the greatest honors I have is getting to introduce the judge from time to time at these types of events. And I can say this without any qualification. There's nobody in public life that I respect and admire more than Judge Emmett. We're very blessed as a community to have him at the helm. We don't want to get into election year, but we want to make sure we keep Judge Emmett where he is, and we want to get behind this bond issue 100%. And make sure we get it passed, not take anything for granted or be complacent. Judge, I want to thank you for your leadership. We support you. We'll be behind you. Come up here and it's all yours. Oh, you got that?
They mic'd me up.
Oh, good. All right. Yeah, I think so. Can you all hear him? All right.
Anybody turning this on? Now it's on? Okay. Well, first.
You know what, Judge? Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to use this. That works. Okay. Well, first, thank you very much to everybody involved with Houston Stronger for putting together this event. It's important, and it's important that all of you are here. Harvey changed a lot of lives. Harvey changed my life. Now, I do apologize. I have to dash off because my priority as county judge, most people don't understand this, is mental health. And that we're not here to talk about mental health, but I have to tell you that because early on I realized that the Harris County Jail is the largest mental health facility in the state of Texas, and that's just fundamentally wrong, and we need to change that. So I had a previous commitment today that I have to get to on mental health, and so it's still important to me. But Harvey, you know, we did Memorial Day, we did Tax Day, we did Hurricane Ike, and I never thought I'd say it, but hurricanes are easy. They're predictable. You just figure out what the storm surge is, you know which areas are going to be inundated by the storm surge, you tell everybody to evacuate from those areas. Everybody else you tell to shelter in place, or now that famous phrase, hunker down, which I'll never get over. As I tell people all the time, I'm the only person who knows what's going to be on my tombstone. You know, here's Ed Emmett, hunkered down forever. You know, so we all just get to live with that. But Harvey was so different because it impacted a much, much wider range of our community. And it brought into my life the word resilience. And for those of you that want to know, resilience and resiliency mean the same thing. If you look up resilience, it's the ability to return to normal. And resiliency, it says the meaning is resilience. So I got that all sorted out. But I've been asked to speak all over the country now about resilience. Why? Because I survived Harvey. Now, I do not say Hurricane Harvey because tomorrow is the start of hurricane season. And I don't want people confusing Harvey with a hurricane because if a hurricane comes our way, people who are impacted by Harvey likely aren't going to be impacted at all by a hurricane. So I have to get that out there. You're going to hear that over and over for the next few days. So resilience. We have got to make our community resilient because, you know, this is going to keep happening. The fact that we've had 3 500-year plus flood events in a 2-year period, as I've said over and over and over, either means our definition of a 500-year flood is wrong or we're safe for the next 1,500 years. But nobody in this room believes that we're safe even for one more year, much less 1,500 years. So at some point, and the experts were up here earlier, we're going to have to understand what our real flood maps are, and we're going to have to know that. But in the meantime,
We have to recognize that we live in a flood-prone area, and we're going to have to take certain steps to get as many people as possible out of harm's way. So when I was first asked to give a speech about resilience, it was to a group up in Boston, and they were from all over the world, and I said, okay, what am I going to tell this group? And being that I started out as a physics major at Rice, and that lasted one semester, and then I switched to economics, I was used to formulas. And so I came up with a formula of what is resilience. And it's real simple. For those of you who remember your math, one parenthesis has 2P plus 2R in it, and then the other parenthesis has PPR. So those two multiplied together equal resilience. Sorry for the engineers and math majors in the room. I know this is a little bit of a stretch. But what does that mean? Well, the first two P's are prevention, right? You prevent as much as you can, and planning, because no matter how much you prevent or steps you take to prevent flooding, you're still going to have some. So you have to plan for what you're going to do when the inevitable flood comes. And the two R's. First thing you have to do is respond to the event. And the second thing is recover. Recovery is much harder than response. It takes a lot longer. So those are the factors that play into it. But what's PPR? Because that's what you multiply those by. And the PPRs are policies. If you don't have the government policies in place, it doesn't matter. Priorities, and I will be the first to admit that if you look at the funding, and that's, you always chase the dollars, flood control has not been the top priority for Harris County or anybody else for a lot of reasons. We provide indigent health care. We have to do that. We provide 60% of the county budget goes straight to criminal justice. We don't have a choice. In both those areas, we don't get to pick our customers. So, and we don't have any control over those costs. And then we do roads and we do parks, and, you know, the Harris County Flood Control District gets a little bit of money every year. Has enough been spent over the years? No. And that gets me to the R, resources. No matter what kind of prevention and plans and response and recovery and policies and priorities you have, if you don't put resources behind it, it's not going to do any good. There's not some, you know, flood control fairy that's going to come down from on high and say, okay, here's your new drainage project. It's going to take dollars. So with that in mind, I will say categorically, I've been in and around public life for quite a while. This is the most important issue that has faced our community in my lifetime. We either get this right, or we're going to see our entire community begin to atrophy. It won't go away, but we will be seen as a flood-prone area, and we will being seen at risk. Companies won't want to come here, and our people won't feel safe. So we have to get this right. You know, from now on, resilience is job one. And what it's going to take is political will. Because without the political will to put the resources behind achieving resilience, we're not going to get anything done. And we live in a world right now that, frankly, it's a little bit difficult. But we have some things going for us. Number one, we're all in this together. If anybody watched the press conference yesterday, I must have said together at least 15 times. Why is that important? Well, think about Harvey. Think about the publicity that all of us got around not only the country, but the world. I still hear people come up and say, gosh, that was so wonderful the way everybody worked together. Well, I don't know what they expected us to do, you know. Mayor and I could have gotten in a fist fight on television or something, but that would have been ugly because neither one of us are, anyway, let's go there. But neighbors help neighbors. Constable Sandlin kind of downplayed a little bit The first responders were tremendous. They were pulling people out of harm's way hour after hour after hour. You know, my daughter and her family were taken out by boat. I understand it. I saw it firsthand. And after the storm passed, neighbors and people that they didn't even know would show up and help muck out people's houses. And by the way, I'd never heard the term mucking before. Got to be careful with that one. And it's that sense of togetherness that we have to go into the future with. And already, I'm beginning to hear a little bit, because, you know, you pick a date for the bond election. Why did we pick August 25th? Well, one of the reasons was actually mentioned in the introduction, John, and I appreciate the little shout out for my election, but this isn't about partisan elections. This isn't about who serves in what office. This is about what are we going to do as a community going forward. So by separating it and getting people to focus on a single issue, on the anniversary of Harvey, which also happens to be a Saturday, which is a good day to have an election, people can come vote, and it will be an educated vote. And why do I say educated vote? Well, I'm going to take you back to a 2013 bond election. And some of you think I'm going to mention the Astrodome, but I'm not. There was another election on that same day in November of 2013. It was for a joint processing center, which would allow Harris County and the city to cooperate, would allow the city to close their jail, would allow us to divert people with mental issues from the criminal justice system, would save $25 million a year, had absolutely no tax increase with it at all. Nobody opposed it. Not a single person uttered a word, not even on social media. And it passed by 400 votes countywide. That taught me a lesson. It taught me a lesson that on a general election ballot, you have a lot of people who just look and say, well, I'm against debt, and they're going to vote no. You have a lot of other people that go in, and this will apply this year. We still have straight ticket voting. They go in and they vote straight Democrat or straight Republican, and they leave. Well, that means they didn't vote on the bond issue. So, and then we have, I don't need to tell you, you just went through the primary, but this fall, it's going to be wall-to-wall commercials for this candidate or that candidate. And being able to get a message out about an issue so important as resilience and flood control would have been very, very difficult. So August 25th is the date. And some people are already, you know, grousing and saying, well, we're against this or we're against that. But that's where the education is going to come in. When I started by saying we're all in this together, the development of the bond issue has to be done as a community. We have a project list out there. It is a draft. I can't stress that enough. We're going to have hearings in all 23 watersheds in Harris County. Hearing's not the right word. We're going to have public meetings, engagement meetings. We're not there to explain to you what we're doing. We're there to have a conversation. I am willing, and my staff is willing, aren't they? Because I tell them they're willing. We're going to try any group that invites us to come talk. I don't care if it's a Sunday school group or a group in a retirement home. It doesn't matter. We want to go anywhere. County officials are going to be willing to go out and engage and have that conversation. Why? Because we've got to have everybody buy in. I don't want this election to be close. I want this election to be an absolute slam dunk, because everybody says, you know what? We ain't going to let this happen again. And that's what that August 25th bond election is all about. It's not set yet. The date is set. But June the 12th, Commissioner's Court, and I'm not allowed to talk to any, we can't have a walking quorum. But my guess is, because, see, that's one of the funny things about the Open Meetings Act. I can't talk to them, but I can read what they say in the newspaper. And they can read what I say in the newspaper. And that's okay. And so we're very careful to make sure we don't violate anything. But everything, all indications are that on June the 12th, we will authorize a bond election for somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.5 billion. That's not the end of it, though, because between that date and about August the 1st, we want to be putting together a list. Now, we're limited on what we can put on the ballot itself. So some people will say, well, you're not telling us how you're spending the money. Yes, we're going to tell you how we're going to spend the money, but under state law, you have to just use certain language for the actual proposition. But by about August the 1st, we hope to be able to put together that final list so that nobody can question. Now, what we have to overcome is cynicism. Already, after yesterday, we had a press conference sort of laying out the process. Already, I've had people say, well, they're leaving Addicks and Barker off because they don't live here and they don't care about us. Well, Addicks and Barker are Corps Engineers projects. They don't belong to us. We can't do that. But we have to be careful how we say that, because one of the worst things you can say to somebody is, that's not my job. You know, that just it irritates me when people say, that's not my job. Well, we have to understand, yes, that's got to be part of the solution, but there are different actors. The city of Houston is going to have some things it's going to be doing that technically aren't county, but we all, I'm going to use the word again, we're all in this together. We can have the greatest bayou system, major watershed system, but if the city can't get the drainage right into that system, it doesn't do any good. And they can have the greatest drainage system in the world, but if we don't have a place for that water to go, it doesn't do them any good. And we have to recognize that we have over 1,000 municipal utility districts in unincorporated Harris County, and a lot of them can play a part. So I'm here today to say we're going to get this right, and we're going to get it right. Not I'm going to get it right, we're going to get it right. It's all of us. So with that, June the 12th is when we'll really start. I've already been contacted. There are numerous people who have formed a PAC, and they're going to be engaged. But ultimately, it's about votes. It's about getting people to come out and vote. And it's about getting people to believe in the goodness of who we are as a community. We saw it during Harvey. We don't want to have to see it again during something else like Harvey. But we can see it this summer. We can see it in a bond election where Democrats and Republicans, and I can tell you that since I'm involved in it, I'm meeting with consultants tomorrow, and they're going to be all across party lines. This is not a partisan issue. It's not a liberal conservative issue. You can't divide us. I'm going to say it one more time. We're going to be in this together. So with that, I'll be happy to take a couple of questions, and we'll go from there. Well, she got her hand up faster than you did. Yes, ma'am. I don't mean to cut you off, but I know what you're going to ask, so can I go ahead and answer it? No, Russ can tell you I have, from early on, we've got to pay attention to Cypress Creek, the watershed itself. There has been conversation about the third reservoir and diverting the overflow from Cypress. We need to worry about Cypress itself, not just the overflow from Cypress. I got that. Best example I can give you is I got a call from a New York Times reporter wanting to talk about Cy-Fair in that area out there. And he said, it didn't used to flood. And I said, well, how do you know? And of course he thought, well, I'm talking to a county yokel here and this isn't going to go well. But I said, no. Back when I was in the legislature, late 70s, early 80s, I lived in Kingwood. I drove to Austin regularly, across 2920. I went by Cy-Fair High School. It was a 3A high school. It's the only high school in the district. Now there are what, 12? They're all 6A high schools. We now have hundreds of thousands of people living in that area. We need to worry about the Cypress Creek watershed, and it needs to be part of the plan. One of the issues we're dealing with is it's not part of the core project. That's going to be something we're going to have to do. That's part of this big bond. It's one of the reasons the bond's as big as it is, to deal with Cypress. So that's why we're going to have the meetings. Let me say it one more time. One more time. We want input. Well, we don't have the money till we have the bond, but we have to convince people like you, and I mean, and this is not criticism, that you're going to benefit. And I'm sitting here telling you, standing here actually telling you, that Cypress Creek is going to be one of those areas that gets a priority. It has to. And, you know, Katy Prairie's going to get, so. But that's what we're trying to do, is engage. Yes, I'll come back to you. This bond will be a flood control bond completely. No, this is just to prevent flooding in the future. We have other ways of you know, taking care of the rescue efforts in that. That's a different funding source. I beat him out of the first question. Well, we have representatives of legislators' offices here. You'd have to ask them that question. I don't mean to be cute about this, but if Harvey wasn't a rainy day, I don't know what is. And I am very hopeful. I am very hopeful that when the legislature meets in January, they'll take some of that money. Because the irony, and I don't want to get off onto this a whole lot, Harris County is larger than 26 states. Our sole source of revenue is the property tax. Nobody likes the property tax. I hate the property tax. We don't get any sales tax revenue, yet we have almost 2 million people who live in unincorporated Harris County. If unincorporated Harris County were a city, it would be the 5th largest city in the United States. We don't have ordinance making power. We don't get any sales tax revenue. That's got to change. And so, by the way, since you're asking, the next time somebody in the legislature says, I'm going to lower your property tax, we're going to put a restraint on the county government, what they are telling you is that we ain't going to have any flood control. It's that simple. It's a zero-sum game. If you cut our property tax, we can't do certain things. We can't change what we do on indigent health care. We can't change what we do on criminal justice, law enforcement. So it's important. And I truly believe, and I've met with several of our Harris County delegation, including one represented here, and I think they're going to understand and they're going to do what's right and say, you know what, Harris County's different than Loving County. Loving County's got 90 people and we have 4.7 million. So we've got to get serious about the way we approach these issues. Yes, sir. We have a number of anomalies in our community, and Buffalo Bio is one of them. It's privately owned, and the city and this is not punning to the city, but the city's going to have to figure out, along with the flood control district, how they deal with private ownership of a bio that everybody agrees something needs to be done to. But at the same time, do you go in and condemn private property through the villages? Well, I understand that, but they didn't condemn it permanently, and this would be something different. But that is one of the issues we're going to have to talk about, and we're happy to talk about them. We cannot, duck and dodge and weave. We've got to address these issues head on as they come up and say, okay, this is a problem. What are we going to do with it? And that is a problem. I agree. But if you go talk to the people who own that property in the villages and down through River Oaks and tell them you're going to take their land from them, they get a little irritated, to say the least. Yes, sir. As I said, resilience has to become job one. The county, though, has certain mandated activities that it has to do. I keep talking about indigent health care, and I don't want to get us off the subject here, but if you look at your property tax bill, 17 cents, over a quarter of your overall county property tax bill goes to indigent health care. So when the state, or if there's money available anywhere else, then that, okay, I'll go ahead and say it. If we had taken Medicaid expansion money, we could have diverted a whole lot of money back to flood control. But we can't. And that's a decision. The county is an arm of the state. We can only do what the state allows us to do. And we have to do what the state tells us to do. And indigent health care is one of those, and criminal justice and courts and all those. So I'm going to say it again. We're all in this together, including the legislators. So we're going to need them in this conversation to say, what are we going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again? Yes, ma'am. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Well, the well, I think, and I'm old enough. I moved to Harris County when I was in high school, and everything was concrete. That used to be the thing. You just concrete the channels and you get the water. Now that's changed. And I think Harris County Flood Control has a much more enlightened approach. I will tell you that there have been instances, and I don't want to take a lot of time, where we do what a group, and I'm going to use the term environmental group, and that may not be totally accurate, wanted us to do, and then another group says, no, that's the wrong thing to do, and we're caught in the middle of that. But since you're sitting next to Marianne, clearly, one of the things we've got to do is save the Katy Prairie. Just say, look, that's it. We're going to save whatever's left of it. We're going to add to it as best we can because it's a natural resource. We just have to do that. So I think there is a more enlightened approach. It may not be totally what you'd like. No, I understand. And there does have to be some conveyance too, though. And I'll give you the example of that. Before, I forget whether it was Memorial Day or Tax Day, the people in the McGregor Park area were all concerned. And the reason they know me is I used to teach tennis at McGregor Park, but that's a whole different subject. And they called and they said, we're going to flood because you made all those improvements to protect the Med Center. Med Center flooded during Allison, hadn't flooded since. You made all those improvements. That water's all going to come down here and flood us. It didn't. Instead, it flooded Meyerland, which had never flooded. I went to Bel Air High School. You know, that area, no, that hadn't happened before. So sometimes you have the unintended consequences. So conveyance, they thought was going to flood them, and it didn't. So, yes, Cynthia. Okay. All right. Let me talk about it. Well, if you know, okay. Well, first I'm going to disagree with the premise, and Cynthia and I go way back on lots of issues. We're actually good friends, by the way. We talk about it a lot now. We do talk about development. Over the years, it's easy to say now, and I'll be the first to say it, were the regulations in place adequate? No. I mean, how could I stand here and say they were adequate? Look what happened. But they were what were kind of allowed under law at the time. Now, what are we going to do going forward? Well, the county's already changed its regulations. The city's changed its regulations. But one of the problems we have is, you said they weren't in the floodplain. They weren't in the designated floodplain, but they were in the floodplain. They just didn't know it. Nobody knew it. Well, but the issue is, and I hate to talk about Addicks and Barker because they aren't ours, but when Addicks and Barker were built in the 1940s, they were 20 miles out of town. Nobody was ever going to live out there. That changed. And as we developed, then nobody kept track of where the old tributaries and creeks were. So one of the major projects that's going to be in this bond is to come up and accurately describe what the floodplains really are. Because clearly what we have on paper now isn't right. So we hear you. I've got time for one more. Okay, y'all want to arm wrestle over which one to ask? Sure. Well, in case you didn't hear it, I'm going to translate it. It is, why don't we quit fighting with Mother Nature and just say she wins sometimes? And that is a large part of what we're talking about doing. When you talk about buyouts, for example, we have voluntary buyouts, and you end up with a checkerboard because not everybody wants to take the buyout. Well, we're going to have to bite the bullet and say, you know what? We're going to come in and condemn the rest of them, but that has to be done. And I've learned all this, and I may get it wrong, and I hope not. Russ will correct me. Those technically wouldn't be buyouts for flooding. Those would be project buyouts, so that we'd buy out the rest of them to turn it into either just a natural area or a detention area or something. We've got to do those kind of things. We've got to, and let me leave you with this, because it's something that I believe I've heard every county commissioner say. we're not going to worry a lot about the cost-benefit analysis and all those arbitrary things. Our job is to get as many people out of harm's way as possible. Bottom line, that's it. To protect the community as much as possible. Because otherwise, I don't want to be in a position of judging and saying, well, this family is worth more than this family. No. We need to get as many families, as many individuals out of harm's way as possible. So I look forward to all these public engagement meetings. Obviously, I won't be able to make all of them, but I have a feeling I'm going to be out every night somewhere between now and August 25th. And I appreciate your being here this afternoon and giving me this opportunity. I appreciate the experts that have been here. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you out on the trail and on August 25th.
Judge Ed Emmett. Judge, before you leave. Judge. Okay, he's going to take his bows. We just want to thank the judge so much. And one of the things I will say from the vantage point of somebody who not only is in the news business but watched this nationwide, despite all of the headaches we had, you could see how the city of Houston and the county work together. And we are so proud of that. We showed the rest of the world how it's done and how it's done right. Now the next step is to see what we can do to make it a lot better in our city and in our county the next time it rains. So thank you so much, Judge Emmett. We're very proud of you. And on behalf of the Houston Stronger Coalition, I want to thank all of you all for attending today. There are materials outside if you'll grab those on your way out the door. And remember once again that HoustonStronger.net website for a lot more information. Thank you all for being here. Be safe on your way home. And let's hope the hurricane season this time around is a lot better.